Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, gentlemen, for your testimony. And Mr. Odom, I want you to know I read your op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. We're going to have Director Free before us on Tuesday, and I look forward to asking him some questions related to it. And Mr. Hamilton, it's great to have you back again. It's wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
A very respected member of the House. When I came to this committee about a year and a half ago and realized the vastness of the intelligence operation of this country and how diffused it is, spread across so many agencies, with nobody really at the helm, it became very apparent to me that a director of national intelligence was really important. So in June, I introduced that legislation, which would create a director of national intelligence, which would give him program authority and budget authority, so that he would have the wherewithal to really oversee this disparate community and to move deck chairs on the Titanic, so to speak. I sent out a dear colleague. I got back virtually no response. It's before this committee now. One response I did get was from Mr. Tenet, and in a letter dated August 17th, August 27th, which, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record if you would give me permission to do so.
Without objection.
I'd like to read a brief part of that letter and then ask you to comment on, I think the feeling is genuine and heartfelt. I have a hard time understanding it because the legislation really prevents this from happening. He says, we share the common goal of a robust intelligence community. I am concerned, however, that the bill would have the unintended effect of weakening rather than strengthening the IC and the CIA. It is my belief that the head of the IC must have a direct relationship with and a more than illusory control over the CIA. The Director of Central Intelligence's authorities as head of the IC are amplified by the CIA's unique position as the United States government's primary all-source intelligence analytic agency, and by its central role in covert actions and liaison with the intelligence and security services of foreign governments. I believe that dissolving these links, which I'm not talking about, but dissolving these links would weaken the community. Thus, I cannot support the bill at this time. After Congress has completed work on the establishment of a Department of Homeland Security, the administration will be in a position to consider whether changes to the organization of the elements of the IC are needed. Now, he offers the rationale. On the other hand, we have this very territorial series of a dozen or so agencies, each of whom relate to various aspects of the State Department, the Defense Department, Central Intelligence Agency. And in this new world, we're spending a great deal of money, and yet there is no real unity of structure and no ability to tailor the community based on specific needs. I'd love to have the comments of each of you, if I might.
You see, I think you're overlooking, at the committee in general here in this discussion this morning, is overlooking the degree of success we have in orchestrating a rather diffuse set of organizations. In the counterintelligence area, where you have the agency in the Attorney General's department, and it isn't really an intelligence organization, but a law enforcement organization, and when you combine that with the fragmentation among border control departments, we get a real mess. And that's what's caused all the problems. To conclude from that you have the same kind of fragmentation problems in the intelligence community, I think is not valid. I disagree with some parts of this. I don't think you weaken the community by having the DCI separated from, if you want to call him the Director of National Intelligence, it's fine. But, and I think there's a little misunderstanding here on what we really mean by this. If you mean making the DCI separate from the Director of the Central Intelligence
That's correct.
Agency.
That's essentially it.
All right, then that's
the DCI could be the DNI for that matter.
Absolutely, and that I'm very much in favor of doing that, and I think it would be a very effective. It could be a very effective arrangement. I find technical difficulty, legal difficulty, and just operational difficulty with giving budget execution authority to this individual inside other departments. Having been under the program management control of a central authority, I find that reasonably effective. I felt very much constrained and kept in line. What I saw lacking was the inability of the staff under the DCI to structure the input-output relationships so we could get an effective budget together. And he was the prisoner of the CIA on this, and the NRO, and other parochial players. And it's freeing him up to where he will impose a program planning budget, a structure system that I think will empower him as much as budget execution authority. Let me say that we draw an analogy between space and intelligence. Okay, all right. Everybody thinks that NASA is in charge of space in this country. Space is a place, not a mission. There are many missions in space. The Commerce Department has a mission in space. It's weather. There's a private sector, telecommunications, the university, science, the intelligence community. There are a dozen other missions in space. Now, can you centralize all those under one czar of space in a single department in the U.S. government? No, and it's kind of a mess. If you use the DCI program management model, you'd have a director of space, and he would have to look over every budget where there's space involved and put them together and say, am I funding adequately each? Which one should I give a plus up? And you get overall comprehensive look, and the Senate then could find out of the House what the input-output relations are. He doesn't have to be able to execute those budgets to cause that to happen. So I think the DCI model, separated from the CIA, it's pretty. There is a separation of sorts, even though one person's wearing the hat now. Is an accumulation of learning about how to manage this federal system.
Right.
So I don't think it's as desperate a shape internally on the foreign intelligence side. I think it is an abject mess on the counterintelligence side.
Just so you know, in my bill, there is no inside authority, and I would like to give a copy to each one of you. Perhaps you'd take a look at it and make any comments you'd care to make. But Mr. Hamilton?
He's going to kick it to me because he thinks he's been
Mr. Hitz
been heard on it. And I, Senator Feinstein, may be bound a little bit by my long history at CIA and tendency to find some of the arguments in the letter that you read from DCI Tenet to be arguments I've heard and tend to agree with over time. But as Congressman Romer has said, and Senator Rockefeller, we've had 9/11. If there isn't a time to, if there isn't a better time to look at this from ground zero, when will there be? And it strikes me, you know, in 1947, you had the creation of the National Security Council, which was intended to do for the President of the United States some of the things that you're talking about putting in the responsibility of a Director of National Intelligence. It was the National Security Council, on behalf of the Secretaries of State and Defense, the President and Vice President, were going to tell the DCI how to organize the collection and, more to the point, the analysis and dissemination of intelligence. President Truman was tired of reading 115 million reports. And it probably isn't possible or desirable to have the National Security the National Security Advisor, in effect put in the role of a DNI, but it strikes me that since September 11, with all of the complaints about the inability of the FBI and the CIA to talk to one another, the President of the United States has fashioned a pretty darn good remedy for that. He sits them down in front of him several times a week and says, what the heck is going on here, and are you guys cooperating? Now, the president can't do that every day. He's got a lot of other things to do. And if your DNI is a person who's going to do that in his behalf with his authority and with something more than and he isn't going to hide behind the White House to fail to come to the Congress to answer your questions on the appropriate occasion, maybe that's something that should be looked at. But it strikes me that budget authority is one thing, but what General Odom keeps pointing back to, management operational authority, that's the thing that the Secretary of Defense in the current structure is never going to give up when it relates to agencies that are supplying him with information that protect the fighting man. And I just, I can understand his point of view. I just think all of these, the DCI, the SecDef, and the director of the FBI have got to work together and have got to do a better job and have got to do it in a way that minimizes overlap and confusion. And maybe a DNI can do that on behalf of the President of the United States and still be responsible to Congress in such a fashion that you can get him up here and ask him what he's done.
Can I add one just short sentence on that?
It's up to the chairman.
Well, I'm very generous and compassionate, and plus the value of the information we're getting.
If you had a national counterintelligence service outside of the FBI and the FBI were in law enforcement, what I proposed in my testimony this morning, under the DCI would already have these people in the room together. It wouldn't be in another department. And that's how you get the counterintelligence side and the domestic side talking to the foreign intelligence side.
Senator Feinstein, I've commented on this quite a bit. I'll just conclude. The thing that puzzles me, I support your idea. The thing that puzzles me here is why we reject, for the intelligence community, the model of organization that we follow in every other enterprise in this country. We have someone at the head who has responsibility and accountability. We accept that, but for some reason we reject it when it comes to the intelligence community.